According to stories in the Bible, Mary Magdalene is at the very heart of the Christian faith. She was perhaps Jesus' most devoted disciple.
After Jesus, Mary Magdalene is arguably the most important person in the New Testament. Why? Because she is the witness to the resurrection.
Yet her role in the religion has been debated for centuries. Could she have been a prostitute, Jesus' lover, or even the brains behind Christianity itself?
She's feisty, she's articulate, she's, dare I say, controlling Jesus.
But what happened to Mary Magdalene after Christ's death is still one of the world's biggest enigmas, with a number of theories and conspiracies still very much alive today.
This could be the moment where we find Mary Magdalene. We have got the equipment, we have got the right place.
But what is the truth? Does Mary Magdalene's body still lay hidden somewhere, waiting to be found?
If we find Mary Magdalene, we will rewrite history.
The Bible claims Mary Magdalene was one of Jesus' most devoted followers, but some suggest she was much more.
Mary Magdalene is one of the most fascinating, kind of mysterious figures in the whole of Western civilization. And that's true whether you are a Christian or not.
Yet in the 2,000 years since her death, Mary's story has become an unsolved mystery. Scholars and amateurs alike are still trying to crack the code of who she really was and the whereabouts of her tomb. The Sea of Galilee, Israel. If the biblical story is accurate, this is where Mary first met Jesus.
When Jesus began his mission, he went from village to village, doing kind of big dramatic stuff first, like casting out demons. One of the people that allegedly cast demons out of was the woman that became known as Mary Magdalene.
We don't know too much about Mary's initial meeting with Jesus. What we do know is that she was possessed by, we're told, 7 demons. People who were demon-possessed lived on the very margins of society.
The Bible claims Jesus cast out the 7 demons from within Mary. From that day, most agree she became a fanatical follower of Christ. But perhaps Mary's most defining moment occurs after the crucifixion. Benna Mantell is exploring the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem, investigating why Mary Magdalene's remains are so highly coveted.
The Garden Tomb is sort of ground zero for the Christians of the world in terms of the most important events in the life of Mary Magdalene.
According to legend, Jesus was placed here after his crucifixion. 3 days later, Mary Magdalene and a group of disciples visit the crypt and discover the stone door rolled open, with the tomb empty.
Mary Magdalene, as well as Mary the mother, are both there coming to check on the tomb. It's only been a few days since the burial, and as they arrive, they see that someone has already pushed that rolling stone. They start to wonder what happened to the body, and when people leave, Mary is still there wondering what's happening next, and then she sees a person, and in fact, she realizes and discovers that this is Jesus, and she is the first one to see Jesus after the crucifixion.
The fact that Jesus first revealed himself in his resurrected state to Mary Magdalene is hugely significant. He chose a woman to reveal this absolutely thunderous fact to.
There would be no Christian movement but for the witnesses. And the first of those witnesses, according to all 4 of the Gospels, is Mary Magdalene.
Despite playing such a pivotal role, the story of Mary Magdalene has become muddied over the millennia.
Mary's name has been tarnished by religious leaders going back as far as the 6th century. In fact, it was Pope Gregory the Great who was the first to claim that Mary was a prostitute.
I think Mary Magdalene's position has been marginalized, yet if you read the Bible, it's perfectly obvious she is a central figure.
There's a very good reason for a pope wanting to declare Mary Magdalene a prostitute. They didn't want women to find her as a role model, so they had to demean her. They had to basically turn her into the worst thing they could imagine, which was a prostitute.
I think one of the reasons that Mary Magdalene is treated so harshly is because church leaders, men within the church, have to suppress what was ultimately quite a powerful and influential woman. And for anybody seeking for a sort of feminist icon in the Bible, Mary Magdalene's the one.
After centuries of slander, attempting to determine fact from fiction is difficult. Yet Mary's relationship with Jesus might be the key to finding her final resting place.
Through the ages, Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene has fascinated people. There is the Gospel of Philip, which records how Jesus loved Mary more than any other of the disciples and used to kiss her on the mouth.
The Gospel of Philip is one of many eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus left out of the Bible. For those hunting for Mary's tomb, these less conventional Gospels provide an unparalleled insight into who the saint really was.
In these alternative Gospels, the one thing that comes over is that she is the star. She's feisty, she's articulate, she's, dare I say, controlling. She seems to be controlling Jesus, almost like the Yoko Ono character.
Intriguingly, the idea of Mary Magdalene controlling Jesus could suggest a very unique relationship, providing clues to why her remains have disappeared.
You see a very special relationship that Jesus has with Mary Magdalene, something that could in fact even lead us to think that Mary Magdalene was in a relationship with Jesus, perhaps his wife.
There's a small army of biblical scholars and theologians that will snort at the idea that Mary Magdalene was the wife of Jesus. They'll tell you there's no evidence whatsoever, but it is a rumor, a story, an angle that refuses to go away.
Whether she was a devout follower or lover, to find Mary Magdalene's remains, scholars must unravel what happened to her after Christ's death. But records of her life after the Ascension are shrouded in mystery.
After the Gospels close with Christ's resurrection, the Bible moves on to what happened next. But Mary really falls from the picture. We don't know what happens to her, and her fate isn't really described.
Mary Magdalene effectively disappears from the Gospel record after the resurrection and the Ascension, and all sorts of legends build up.
The real question of what happens to Mary after the crucifixion, it's really anyone's guess, and there are a lot of people who, throughout the ages, actually said that Mary somehow found her way to France. We even have certain popes who actually say that Mary actually ended up in France.
Southern France. History enthusiasts Pat Yockel and Ronnie Endler have spent the last 20 years trying to uncover Mary Magdalene's tomb. In 2013, they thought they'd tracked her down to a cave near Carcassonne.
That looks pretty amazing. It looks man-made.
But they hit a wall.
It doesn't go further. See? It's solid rock, so it's definitely the end of this cave.
Despite failing once, they're back on the hunt for the saint's remains.
With research, we think now we pinpointed exactly the lost resting place of Mary Magdalene. During our quest, we had lots of dead ends, but this time we are absolutely sure this is the place to be.
Pat's research has unearthed a set of 13th century documents found in church archives, which he believes leads to Mary Magdalene's burial place in southern France.
According to many documents we saw, all of those documents telling the same story, that Mary Magdalene came to France.
With this new evidence, Pat thinks he's one step closer to solving one of the Bible's greatest mysteries. What happened to Mary Magdalene after the crucifixion? So could she really have made her way to France, as some legends proclaim?
Mary Magdalene's fate after the resurrection is uncertain, and there is a story of Mary Magdalene rocking up in a boat on the coast of southern France.
Many historians believe that after the crucifixion, Mary, like all of Christ's followers, was persecuted by her pagan Roman overlords. Fearing for their lives, many fled the Holy Land.
So in the aftermath of the crucifixion, followers of Jesus were being rounded up by the Romans. So Mary Magdalene and 2 or 3 other women flee on a boat.
Known as the Tale of the Three Marys, believers claim Mary Magdalene boarded a boat in Israel with 2 other women, also named Mary. They travelled the entire length of the Mediterranean Sea, landing at Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer in the south of France.
Now, curiously, this boat has no oars, no sails, but somehow manages to go practically the entire length of the Mediterranean. It washes up on the southern coast of France, where Mary Magdalene makes it to shore and begins her Christian mission among the French.
If Mary Magdalene did arrive on the shores of what became known as Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer, well, that would have been a pretty important catalyst for the spread of Christianity in Europe, because she was one of the most energetic proponents of spreading the good news.
If Mary Magdalene did land on the beaches, what it signifies is the extension of what is to become Christianity, but led by a woman.
Though the story of Mary Magdalene travelling to France has little grounding in historical texts, scholars point to how the saint is still revered in the country as evidence.
Mary Magdalene has always been a very popular figure in France. There are a very significant number of ecclesiastical buildings, churches, abbeys named after her, a huge number of villages and towns. Even after the decline of Catholicism in France, she remains a very popular figure.
Mary Magdalene is revered in some parts of the south of France and still exerts a very strong cultural influence. And many, particularly from the Catholic tradition, still very much treat those sites where it's believed she went to as holy sites and as places of pilgrimage and veneration.
Pat Yockel and fellow amateur archaeologist Ronnie Endler are on a quest to find the saint's remains. They are driven by 13th century documents written by a local aristocrat to the Pope, claiming that Mary travelled to France. The pair has tracked down the point where they believe she landed.
We are now in Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer, and according to legend, Mary Magdalene set foot exactly on land here. This is the starting point of all our research we're doing for so long. According to all the stuff we found so far, it's just more than a legend. This is the place where the Christianization of Europe began.
Today, many in the church consider it fact that Mary Magdalene travelled to France, yet for some, the crux of the story is who travelled with her.
In the account of the journey across the Mediterranean, we're told that the women were accompanied by another woman called Sarah. Now, this woman, according to some people, was a servant, but according to others, she was the daughter of Mary Magdalene and Jesus Christ.
In recent years, thanks to 2 best-selling books, one in the 1980s, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and one more recently, The Da Vinci Code, Many, many more people think Jesus and Mary Magdalene had children and basically kicked off this sacred bloodline that mysteriously continues to this day.
But perhaps Mary and her supposed daughter weren't the only people in the boat. Some believe Christ himself was smuggled out of the Holy Land too.
I believe Jesus came here with Mary. It's amazing. Can you imagine how it feels to be in exact the same spot 2,000 years ago? The Holy Family landed. So maybe we would find one day this particular spot where Jesus is buried as well.
There's a whole series of narratives about Mary and Jesus eloping to France with a baby. It raises all sorts of fascinating ideas, which is kind of enticing, and it fuels legends, it fuels dramas, it fuels films.
As tantalizing as it is to contemplate the bloodline of Christ, for Pat, the first step in locating Mary Magdalene's remains is to find out where she travelled after she landed. Since the turn of the 20th century, one seemingly inconsequential French village has become entwined with the legend of Mary Magdalene and a mysterious modern-day priest.
You can't really talk about the whole story of Mary Magdalene in the south of France without touching on Rennes-le-Chateau.
In the late 19th century, in a tiny hilltop village, Rennes-le-Chateau, there was a priest called Béranger Saunier who was renovating the church. And it is said that he found a document in a pillar in the church connected with Mary Magdalene.
For some people, he discovered proof that Jesus and Mary had been married, and they had a bloodline.
According to legend, the priest blackmailed the Vatican with the secret he'd found. Then, almost overnight, he became inexplicably rich.
We can't completely rule out that Saunier found the remains of Mary Magdalene and maybe sold it to the church or sold it to some wealthy person who wanted the body of that biblical figure, but we have no evidence, of course.
And certainly it's true that there is a genuine mystery connected with Rennes-le-Chateau, connected with the 19th century priest, and he was certainly utterly devoted to Mary Magdalene.
Over the last 100 years, the village has become a magnet for treasure hunters and tourists alike. Yet to this day, no trace of the priest's treasure or the source of his wealth have ever been found. Which is why, for Pat, Rennes-le-Chateau is a dead end.
In the past, we were looking for Mary Magdalene in Rennes-le-Chateau, but now, according to our new clues, we think we were looking in the wrong place.
According to the 13th century letter that Pat uncovered, there is suggestion that the saint's remains may lay hidden in a place where no one has looked before.
So this is the Basilica of St. Maximin. Some say it contains the skull of Mary Magdalene.
Pat has discovered a letter written to a medieval pope in a church archive. Dating from 1295, it claims that the body of Mary Magdalene was found here in a secret crypt. Father Florian Racine is the rector of the Basilica.
We have here the skull of Mary Magdalene.
The church believes this skull is from the body described in Pat's letter.
We know that it's a little strange to expose like that the part of a dead person, but when people pray here, they have some kind of special access to Mary Magdalene.
According to local folklore, after arriving in France, Mary Magdalene travelled 100 miles east.
There is a story that when Mary Magdalene did land in southeastern France, she went further inland and ended up in what is known as St. Maximin. She continued with the teachings of Jesus Christ, and the last of her years were spent in a grotto
Nearby to St. Maximin is a grotto that's still revered as a place where Mary Magdalene prayed and maybe even lived, and it's still a focus point for the prayerful, for the pious, to go and share their love for Mary Magdalene.
We knew Mary Magdalene lived deep penance and contemplation of Jesus in the grotto, but we didn't know where she was buried.
At the time Pat's letter was written, legend has it that Charles II was visited by Mary in a dream, where she instructed him to hunt for her remains. After having this vision, Charles told his men to search the area for a secret crypt.
So finally, after a few years of searching, they were digging like that, and boom, they dig, they fell the sarcophagus.
In the year 1279, there were excavations conducted in St. Maximin by orders of Charles II, the Count of Provence. They found a marble sarcophagus dating back to the 1st century AD. And when they opened the sarcophagus, this sweet smell came out of it. And what was that sweet smell? It was the oil, of course, that Mary Magdalene poured onto the feet of Jesus. What more proof did you need that Mary Magdalene was buried there?
The church is adamant that this is the skull of Mary Magdalene. They claim when the skull was found in the Middle Ages, a piece of skin was still attached to it, miraculously preserved from the moment Jesus touched Mary's forehead.
In many paintings, we see Jesus pushing a little bit Mary Magdalene, like that, touching this piece of skin. And so this piece of skin was touched by the risen Lord, so it's a sign, just a sign, but it's a sign of the resurrection. I truly believe that we have here the relics of Mary Magdalene, and I cannot prove it historically, but I can experience in this place there is a special blessing, grace, presence of Mary Magdalene.
Today, the Basilica of Saint-Maximin has been built on the spot where Mary Magdalene was apparently found. Many claim it was funded by the sale of some of her body parts as relics.
In Europe, most big cathedrals of the big cities, they have different relics of Mary Magdalene, probably, I say probably, given by the monks here for some money to build this beautiful basilica.
While the church doesn't question the veracity of the skull, some scholars have their doubts.
Call me an old cynic, but I don't think that is Mary Magdalene. But in a way, it doesn't matter. It's what people believe, and it's a focus for their great love of her. They see her as somebody worth revering, not just a pathologically sobbing prostitute.
The skull found in St. Maximin is clearly something of great importance to those who venerate religious relics. But as to whether it could be tied to any individual, much less Mary Magdalene, I'm pretty skeptical.
Could the skull of Mary Magdalene really be in this crypt? Or does other evidence point to her final resting place being elsewhere? Some suggest an ulterior motive behind the supposed discovery of the saint.
We mustn't forget that the time that Charles II of Provence allegedly found Mary Magdalene's relics, that was a huge time for the relic industry in general. And Mary Magdalene being big in the south of France anyway, she was the ultimate Christian saint to find a relic of.
What you have to remember is that if you're an abbey, if you're a monastery, and you just happen to chance upon the relics of an apostle or a saint, that is big business. You know, you're going to attract pilgrims from all over Europe and the world. Goodness me, if you've got Mary Magdalene, well, you know, ka-ching, you're in the big time.
If you look at St. Maximin today, it is a relatively small place dominated by its basilica and dominated by the legend of Mary Magdalene. And you know, you don't have to be cynical to think, there was this big pilgrimage trade which generated money. It was all a kind of generating industry.
Pat believes the letter he has backs up the legend that Mary's body was found in this town. However, he thinks the skull in the golden sarcophagus is a fake, and her real remains lie hidden elsewhere.
For me, there's no question that they found the body of Mary Magdalene on this place, but it could be that this skull was replaced by someone to take it to another secret location.
According to Pat, the 13th century document he discovered refers to someone who had access to the treasured relics and could have moved them without raising any suspicion.
This is the original document of Pope Boniface VII. On this Latin document you see Ugoni de Vincini, which is the Latin name of Hugues de Voisin. I think he took the body to his hometown, brought it to his home.
With this new evidence, Pat is hoping he can finally unlock the 2,000-year-old mystery and find Mary Magdalene's remains.
If we find Mary Magdalene, we will rewrite history.
It's always possible that we're just looking in the wrong place for the remains of Mary Magdalene. We don't really know what happened to her after the resurrection of Jesus.
So what exactly does Pat's manuscript say about the remains of Mary Magdalene?
So this is the copy, and you can see we are in possession of Mary Magdalene in the church of the Priory of St. Maximin.
For Pat, this document proves Mary Magdalene was found by the Count of Provence, Charles II, in Saint-Maximin. But it also mentions a second name, someone who had access to the body and could have moved it.
So, according to the documents, Charles II, he ordered his Seneschal de Provence, Hugues de Voisin, to protect the excavation site of Mary Magdalene and keep away the unbelievers and not to steal anything from the excavation site.
Acting as Charles II's enforcer, Hugues de Voisin was a wealthy landowner and knight. He would have understood the power the relics of Mary Magdalene commanded.
Hugues de Voisin was such a tiny character in history. There's no pictures of him, there's very little writing about him or about his life. But what we do know could suggest that he played a pivotal role in one of the greatest Christian mysteries.
For Pat, the French nobleman did far more than just protect the body of Mary Magdalene. Pat believes that, fearing either theft or destruction of the holy relics, Hugues de Voisin hid the body.
So we think Hugues de Voisin took the body because once someone came in possession of a holy relic, he would have more power in this region. We think he brought bits and pieces, if not the whole body, to his hometown and hid it in a small church, which is dedicated to Mary Magdalene today.
If Pat's correct, Hugues de Voisin moved Mary Magdalene's relics over 200 miles to a small church in a village today known as Pezon.
The Chapel of Pezons dates to about the 10th century, but archaeological digs nearby show the possibility of over 2,000 years of religious activity in this site.
According to Pat's research, back in medieval times, this town was called Voisin, after its patriarch, Hugues de Voisin. But the real smoking gun is the name etched into the wall of the crypt at Saint-Maximin, where Mary Magdalene was supposedly found.
We found, surprisingly, in the crypt of Saint Maximin, a writing which says Voisin.
To Pat, this graffiti tells him both who took the relics and the village where they're hidden. But that's not all. Connected by a line is another secret symbol which he thinks is a medieval trail of breadcrumbs leading to Mary's secret tomb.
We are tracking down an arched cross. The Christians always used it to pinpoint, look, here is buried a holy person.
Pat believes this graffiti is a secret code left by Hugues de Voisin, telling future generations where he hid Mary Magdalene's remains.
And to our surprise, we went to Pizan and we found exactly this arched cross. Exactly. It's like a copy of the one in the crypt. We don't think this is just ancient graffiti. We think this is a map. We think those arched crosses will lead to the final resting place of Mary Magdalene.
The theory that French nobleman Hugues de Froissin in the 13th century removed these remains from Saint Maximin and reinterred them in a chapel at Pezin. Now, this is actually not at all far-fetched, as strange as it might sound. I mean, there is a really well-established tradition in the medieval period of moving remains if they were particularly valued. For example, the remains of a saint.
Treasure hunters who are out there looking for Mary Magdalene could well be onto something. In the south of France, there are lots of clues about the real Mary Magdalene.
It is quite plausible that Hugues de Froissin did carve these arch crosses, that they were made by him, they're his graffiti, but that they are points on some sort of treasure map, that is one step too far.
Pat is sure the arched crosses are a secret medieval code marking the tomb of Jesus' most devoted follower. Armed with this evidence and modern technology, Pat is hoping he can reveal the final resting place of Mary Magdalene underneath this ancient chapel.
We are now at Pezin, and this is the chapel Marie Madeleine. And we think Marie Madeleine is buried inside here.
Today, they will try to verify their theory that medieval aristocrat Hugues de Voisin moved the saint's remains from where they were originally discovered and secretly hid them under this chapel.
To have that opportunity to finally put boots on the ground and do some survey on a site that you've spent years researching is so exciting.
Ah, Ronnie, the coat of arms of the family de Voisin. See, this church belonged to Hugues de Voisin. You can see it, right? Is that right? This is the coat of arms of the Voisins.
Yeah.
Pat and Ronnie have been tracking a symbol known as the Arched Cross.
Look, Ronnie, this is exactly the same sign. This is the Arched Cross, exactly like in St. Maximin. Look at that. Do you see the resemblance? This is fantastic.
The chapel appears to be covered in the secret symbols.
Wow, look. Look.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So what Hugues de Voisin was doing with these crude symbols etched into the walls was essentially leaving clues to future generations so they could find her body.
If Pat's hunch is correct, beneath the chapel's floor is a secret burial chamber.
When you see this very small chapel today, hundreds of people drive by it every single day. It's almost insignificant. But imagine if it actually holds the bones of Mary Magdalene. This chapel is called Chapel of the Magdalene. Could that be a clue?
To prove his theory, Pat is planning a non-invasive survey using a magnetometer.
So what this machine is doing is to measure the density of the soil. So it can see if the soil was once disturbed, or if someone buried something, or if there is a void underneath.
A magnetometer is one of the most useful devices that archaeologists use to basically look underground without digging and see what's there.
Archaeological tools such as this are non-destructive geophysical methods to understand what's underground, to locate voids that may have been used for burial sites.
After 20 years of research, armed with this technology, today Pat has gained special access from the local authorities to carry out a survey of the chapel's floor.
Okay, she might be buried here. All right, Ronnie. The moment of truth. So let's start scanning.
Let's start scanning.
All right, go.
The machine detects how the ground below reacts to a magnetic field. Once processed, it will create an image of what's underneath.
After all those years of research, we're finally here. This is the moment of truth.
I mean, can you imagine the excitement that there is in that chapel as they are scanning the floor of this medieval building to finally find out if the body of Mary Magdalene is deep down below?
Look, this is another arched cross. This is an old gravestone, and it's exactly where we think Mary Magdalene is buried. Coincidence?
To Pat, this stone is another breadcrumb, suggesting that Hugues de Voisin could have hid Mary Magdalene's body here.
This could be Mary Magdalene's gravestone.
After years of research, Pat has finally managed to scan beneath the floor of this church.
Pat, we have finished the scan.
Great. Okay.
I need a beer.
Done. Hopefully we'll find something.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, let's go.
If Pat's correct, the results will show a large void under the chapel's floor where Mary Magdalene may have lain hidden for centuries.
We just transferred the data from the device to the computer.
Pat's hoping the results show a secret crypt below the chapel.
We've done it.
We've done it. Great.
For Pat, the results are conclusive.
After 20 years of research, this reading shows we are right. There is something underneath. Clearly you can see on this image the color blue. And a blue reading always shows a low density of the ground. So that shows clearly that there is a void, exactly where it should be, in front of the altar. It's very, very likely that in this church, in this void, whatever it is, the remains of Mary Magdalene are buried, yes.
Could Pat really have found the grave of Jesus' most devoted follower?
The results to me look like the detection of spaces in between rock or solid ground. So that could have been either a space intentionally carved out or a natural cave. It definitely means that there's a void underneath the chapel.
Yet some believe the results are far from certain.
These results indicate some sort of magnetic anomaly in this chapel, but it does not, to my eye, suggest the presence of a grave of any kind.
While some agree the results support Pat's theory, further work is needed before he can finally uncover the remains of Mary Magdalene. Pat would need to obtain permits to dig beneath the church, which could take years.
Yeah, next step would be we need to dig and we need to confirm what the machine picked up. It could be natural, of course, it could be a natural cave, but it could be also the crypt. But for now, this is the best result we could get.
If the biblical story is correct, some 2,000 years ago, Mary Magdalene walked the earth with Christ. Whether a prostitute, wife, or just devout follower, she's left behind a legacy that many would argue is second to none.
Mary Magdalene is certainly the most important woman in the New Testament. She's also arguably one of the most important women in history, largely because of the way she was reacted against, and that informed the way certainly the Catholic Church behaved towards women for 2 millennia.
If we were able to prove that the remains of a human body were those of Mary Magdalene, that would prove the veracity of the Bible.
If Mary Magdalene's remains were found and verified, this would be a momentous occasion. I do find an interest in people who are still searching for the remains of Mary Magdalene. I think for many of them, it will be a concrete fact of what has been based in faith for so long.
Skeptics doubt if we will ever know for sure if we found the saint's remains.
Honestly, it's entirely possible that somebody, somewhere, someday will find the remains of the woman who was Mary Magdalene. Will we be able to identify her as such? Almost certainly not.
It is so hard to verify the remains of saints, particularly one as high profile and controversial as Mary Magdalene. Relics have been changing hands for 2 millennia. I don't think we'll ever truly know where the bones of Mary Magdalene are, or if they even exist anymore.
Regardless, intrigue lingers to this day.
It's fascinating that in the 20th century, when we have conspiracy theories that cover everything, from microchips in vaccines to vapor trails, probably the most widely known conspiracy theory in the world centers on Mary Magdalene.
What is important is to think about the core of why people wanted to worship Mary Magdalene in and around that area of France. Did she actually get there? We don't know. We have no historical evidence for that whatsoever. But did a cult grow up around her there? Yes, it did. When you have one of those essential Christian figures associated with a specific location, it empowers that location. It enriches that location. It pulls pilgrims towards that location. So in that respect, the cult of Mary Magdalene is very influential and very important.
If you want to know my opinion as to where exactly Mary Magdalene is buried, I think the most likely answer would be she's probably buried in the Holy Land. So to all those treasure hunters, let's just first make sure that we're not missing something directly below our noses here in the Holy Land.
But for some, the search continues.
Well, it's great, it's amazing, but we need to take another step. Now, dig. This will be a hard piece of work, but yeah, we came so far.
If you're great, I will go with Pat, even if it takes another 20 years.
As long as I'm alive, I will never give up looking for Mary Magdalene's remains.